Wolves definitely have a possibility of coming into Colorado. It's just very difficult with the landscape. So since wolves were reintroduced in 1995, we've only had three official wolf sightings since then. One in 2004, which came into Colorado, got hit by a car in Idaho Springs, and that kind of propelled Colorado into creating a wolf management plan in 2005. So that kind of helped us, Colorado as a state, kind of decide that we need to figure out what we're going to do with wolves when they get here. And then after that, we had another wolf come travel over 1,000 miles and come down to just north of Rifle and eat poison, unfortunately, and die just north of Rifle. Then our third wolf that came into Colorado was in 2015. It was mistaken as a coyote and shot in Kremlin, Colorado. So it is possible to have wolves come into Colorado, but one individual does not make a pack, right? So there has been a lot of research over the past 20 years asking that question: do the people of Colorado actually support wolf reintroduction? And what they've found is about 60 to 70% of the Colorado residents actually support wolf reintroduction. So there are definitely a lot of people who support that idea. Obviously, there is some concerns with that, but those concerns can definitely be overcome overall as well. Defenders is in support of just restoring wolves to Colorado. If recolonization happens, fantastic. If reintroduction was another option, then they also would support that idea as well. So their stance is that they want to have wolves in Colorado. It's the last missing piece for connecting all the way from Alaska down into Mexico along that whole Rocky Mountains. So that's one of those things that it just really hasn't been done before in a conservation effort, and you really wouldn't know. I mean, you can't really imagine the type of benefits that would come from that. So that's kind of Defender's position. Each side has benefits and hurdles to overcome, but we, as defenders of wildlife, we just want them on the landscape as well. The other issue with recolonization is that Wyoming has recently reclaimed state management of wolves in the state. So as a part of that, they've decided that 85% of the state wolves are classified as a predator. And so what that means is that wolves can be shot on sight. And so that creates a bigger barrier. Since reintroduction in 1995, we only had three. But now with this extra variable involved, it might create an even bigger hurdle for wolves to get to Colorado. So for Colorado specifically, we find that we're both about wolves for Colorado and the ecosystem that it helps in creating a better balance for Colorado. So you have places like Rocky Mountain National Park where elk numbers are just through the roof, and as a result, they've actually had to put up fences around riparian areas to try to prevent elk from eating up aspen and willow and all of these things. So that's one of the big reasons Defenders really supports restoring wolves to Colorado, but Defenders of wildlife is all about protecting and enhancing endangered and imperiled species. So we want to help create better habitat for them, but also protect them in a way that will allow them to be in their historic ranges. So recolonization is one option, and the other option is for reintroduction. Recolonization of wolves would be having them come from either the north of Wyoming down to Colorado, or the other option would be having the Mexican gray wolves come up from Arizona and New Mexico. Each of those have very difficult challenges. So you have Wyoming that now has state management of wolves, and because of that, 85% of the state, which is a huge barrier, wolves are classified as a predator, so they can shoot them on sight. And then you have another obstacle in Arizona and New Mexico. Well, wolves can't cross this barrier, which is basically Highway I-40. And once they cross that boundary, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will go in, capture them, and bring them back. So as a result, recolonization has those issues. The other option is to have reintroduction. Reintroduction has its own hurdles. For example, Colorado Parks and Wildlife most recently put into resolution that they do not support reintroduction of wolves in general, and they also specifically classified Mexican gray wolves. So because there's not a lot of support from the state management, that creates a hurdle to try to overcome. Doesn't make it impossible, but if enough people want wolves, like I mentioned earlier, there's been 20 years of research showing 60 to 70% people support it. So if it becomes more of the will of the people, then wolves could easily be reintroduced that way. So some of the benefits of having wolves back on the landscape is more on the ecological side. So with wolves being absent for almost 70 years, elk have not acted like elk for a very long time. They act more like cattle, or they almost lawnmowers where they just eat grass, forbs, a lot of aspen and willow. And as a result, you don't have any of that regeneration occurring. And with wolves being back on the landscape, they'll cause elk to move a lot more, cause deer to move around a lot more. And because of that, you'll have this release of energy. So you'll have aspen, willow, cottonwood come back, which creates great habitat for species like songbirds or beaver, and so that it creates a lot better, healthier ecosystem overall. So that's one of the benefits. Another big benefit is more just for future generations being able to come be in Colorado, hike those tall peaks, being able to camp under the stars and potentially know or have a chance to see wolves on the landscape. So that's, there's a lot of people who go to Yellowstone for that reason. One of those thoughts is that, or studies that have been done, is that because wolves are back in Yellowstone and people come to see wolves, generated $35 million as a result of it. Doesn't mean that it'll happen in Colorado just because we don't have Yellowstone National Park. We have other things, but doesn't mean that it could bring some income to the state of Colorado as a result as well. So that's definitely a possibility. It doesn't mean it will be a for sure thing though. Like I mentioned, they do use Yellowstone for the benefits of $35 million. And like I mentioned earlier, Colorado isn't Yellowstone, so there's definitely that to take into consideration. And I think more of the concerns for the other side that's concerned about having wolves on the landscape comes more from livestock and ranching communities, which is definitely a concern. It's understandable. Wolves do kill livestock every now and again, but what we know is on an industry scale that wolves kill less than 1% of livestock. That includes all the other predators. It includes, livestock end up dying more from weather and internal issues and birthing and things like that, and less from predators. But if you're a rancher, that doesn't matter. It matters if I'm the one being affected by wolves. And so a lot of especially for Colorado, we have an opportunity to figure out a compensation program, which is one option that is better than anywhere else. Like, we can learn from Idaho and learn from Montana and all those other states with wolves already there. And create a program that addresses a lot of the concerns of the ranching community. The other thing that Defenders is working more towards or working on now, and we have for a lot of other states, is non-lethal coexistence. So trying to figure out what tools are the most effective, and also figuring out the best opportunity to utilize them. So we've definitely worked on different projects throughout the Northern Rockies, to working with ranchers or working with sheep herders to try to help alleviate those concerns altogether. So there's been a lot of research looking at a lot of different non-lethal tools. So one of them that we're really interested in Colorado is a carcass removal program. So reducing those attractants. So when an animal dies on the landscape, whether it's through disease or an animal gets killed by coyotes or whatever, removing that attractant to not bring in scavengers, that's one option for sure. We've kind of worked on that in Montana, and it's been proven to be very successful. Another big, one of the best tools that we have at our disposal is just more human presence. So what that means is having a range rider on the landscape. So having someone out there always monitoring, either having telemetry equipment to monitor where wolves are at, or just to mainly focusing on livestock and figuring out, okay, this one looks a little sick, so they can bring them in so that it's not as vulnerable. So having human presence is one of the bigger things we help promote. We have programs to help pay for those, so it's a 50-50 cost share, in which we help provide either some kind of amount of money to help pay for them to be on the landscape. Another tool that we use is called flaggery. For some reason, wolves are really don't like flags blowing in the wind. There's been some techniques developed to that are on flags are on fencing, movable fence, and they're electrified to help create a little bit more of a punch. It doesn't hurt the animal. It's like if you rub your feet across the carpet and you get shocked. It's kind of like that for wolves.
So with the artificial nature of reintroduction, do you think that this would affect the response of prey species in contrast to a more natural process of recolonization?
No, I think just having wolves on the landscape is obviously going to change the behavior, but that's kind of what we're looking for. Elk, like I had mentioned before, eat a lot of vegetation, just kind of sit there and don't act like elk have always acted when wolves are on the landscape. So the idea of having them, whether it's through reintroduction or recolonization, will definitely create a change, but it will be a beneficial change.
So with the elk population, there was a study done in Montana about how the reintroduction of wolves affected the birth of a lot of females, and it really stressed them out, so a lot of them weren't getting pregnant. Do you think that would happen here, and do you think it would have a significant impact on the elk population?
Yeah, so I don't know that study per se. What I've also heard is that mountain lions are killing a lot more of the fawn and in certain areas. So I don't think that it would affect that per se, but I wouldn't know. But what I do know is that, wolves coming to the landscape make elk act more like elk. They will have them move around. Yes, wolves eat elk. That's just what they do. But Colorado has does have the highest elk population in the entire United States. So that, that's a lot of the big concerns is that, if wolves are on the landscape, hunters will never have any success whatsoever. But what we know from Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming is that they have had record high hunter success since in the past 10 decades or past decade. So there are a lot of hunter success even with wolves being on the landscape. So much so that in Montana they've had to add shoulder seasons because those elk populations are above their management objectives. So they're wanting to have people hunt more. So because of that, those effects are not really something to be concerned about. For Yellowstone, it has been talked about a lot, especially by Doug Smith, who's in charge of the wolf project up there, that wolves and elk are starting to create an equilibrium within themselves of highs and lows and kind of trying to find their niche for balance. And it's definitely possible for Colorado to have that kind of same balance and trying to figure each other out and figuring out, having a population increase a little bit at the start, but as I've kind of mentioned, yes, wolves do kill elk, but they are also going to make them move around a lot more. And so that's the main thing, is that allowing for more ecological benefits overall. So that's, they will try to balance each other out and kind of come into that equilibrium or balance.
So in such a polarized topic with such pro-wolf and such anti-wolf, you will provide us numbers with 60 to 70% of people supporting wolves' reintroduction back into Colorado. However, there might be a different opinion. So how do we know what opinion to believe?
Right, so there's a lot of scientific literature, about 20 years worth of information of polling, asking those exact same questions of, do you support wolf reintroduction? And those have been peer reviewed over time and published in scientific articles. Another breakdown, some of those concerns of it's only the Front Range, it's only Denver people, but a lot of those studies have broken down demographics of where the study was done and also who was interviewed. So one of them, the first one ever done was in 1994, which asked the West Slope and the East Slope on it. And what they found was the people on the West Slope had a 65% support of wolf reintroduction, and that's where wolves are most likely to be, is in this lot of mountains, forested areas on the western slope. And then also one of the studies broke down the demographics a lot more, that, and they found that in the Southern Rockies ecoregion, 40% of actual ranchers supported wolf reintroduction. Now, that obviously that's not a majority, that's not 60 or 70, but that's not zero as well. So that shows that, it's just not as polarized as some people think. I talk a lot about data, and I talk a lot about trying to figure out the facts, and those are definitely important. But in order to reach across that aisle and talk, everybody's polarized on one side or the other, that doesn't necessarily going to make wolf being restored into Colorado any easier. So being able to understand each other and putting yourself in those boots basically is going to be far more effective than just trying to say, you need to learn what I know and you need to just accept what I do. So being able to talk about, like I mentioned earlier, compensation that makes more sense for them, for the ranching community, as well as trying to make sure that wolves are going to be able to be in Colorado and have a sustainable population. So trying to create a working relationship. We don't have to value wolves in the same way, but also trying to respect each other enough to work together is definitely the thing that I find is most useful. I mean, I've worked Alberta down to Arizona, New Mexico on wolf. I've seen wolves up close and personal from me to you guys, and it's really exciting every time. But it's less about wolves and it's more about people. If you give wolves just a chance, they'll do just fine. And it becomes more about working with people and trying to get them, get everybody on board to work together, or just enough to be trusting and respectful of one another. And I think that's the really take-home message, is that unless you're going to work together, this is never going to be an easy process, regardless of how wolves get here.